Each testimony builds a stronger case. Every sharp focus reveals clarity. Learning your legal rights, upholding unyielding justice.
Your badge number and the name of your supervisor.
You need to step back, ma'am.
I am entitled to that information. Badge number, now.
Pre-check lane 3, non-compliant passenger.
I am not non-compliant. I have done nothing wrong.
Some stories break for a week and then the world moves on. This one didn't. What happened inside George Bush Intercontinental Airport on a Tuesday morning in Houston, Texas, started as a 14-minute interaction at a TSA pre-check lane. It ended with a federal judge in handcuffs, blood on a screening table, and a body camera an officer had reported as broken playing on a courtroom screen in front of a federal jury. The officer bet on silence. He lost. If you are new here, subscribe and drop your location in the comments. This channel covers stories that deserve more than a headline, and this one is at the top of that list. Here's exactly what happened. The pre-check lane at Terminal C was running clean that morning. 7:48, the kind of Tuesday that moves without friction, business travelers in dark suits, families managing strollers and carry-ons, airline crew cutting through with the practiced efficiency of people who do this every day. The scanners cycled. TSA agents processed travelers without pause. The terminal hummed with the ordinary noise of a city moving itself from one place to another. A woman joined the pre-check line, 52 years old, navy blazer, leather portfolio bag, the kind of posture that comes from 2 decades of standing in federal courtrooms. Her credentials were already out: judicial identification, pre-check documentation, State Department travel clearance held forward before anyone asked. She had learned that lesson over years of travel. Being ready was faster than being questioned. An officer was already watching her approach. He stepped forward before she reached the entrance and told her this lane was for verified travelers. He said regular screening was to her left. He said it at a volume that carried. She extended her credentials and told him she was a federal appellate judge on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. He took the identification. He held it for 3 seconds. He handed it back without scanning it, without examining the holographic seal, without looking at the photograph long enough to confirm the match. He told her to step aside. Directly behind her, a white man in a rumpled blazer walked through without breaking stride. A white woman with 2 children was waved forward with a smile. A white couple in their 70s was helped through by an agent who held their bags. None of them were asked for anything. Her name was Judge Carol Weston, born in Port Arthur, Texas, the youngest of 4 children raised by a nurse and a high school football coach. She was the first person in her family to sit for the bar exam and the first to argue before a federal circuit court. She graduated second in her class from Howard University School of Law, joined the U.S. Attorney's Office before the ink on her degree was dry, and spent 19 years prosecuting cases that other attorneys wouldn't touch: public corruption, organized crime, civil rights violations, law enforcement misconduct. She had put police officers in prison. She had stood in front of juries and delivered verdicts that changed policy. She had argued cases that were now assigned reading in first-year constitutional law courses. When the president nominated her to the Fifth Circuit, the Senate confirmed her 88-9. The dissenting 9 cited judicial temperament, a characterization that legal scholars spent weeks dismantling in op-eds across the country. She had been on the bench for 7 years. Her rulings on Fourth Amendment protections and equal protection law were cited in courtrooms from Houston to D.C. That morning, she was traveling to Washington for an emergency appellate session. The case involved federal sentencing guidelines and required her physical presence on the bench by 11 o'clock. Her bag contained her judicial identification, a letter of diplomatic courtesies from the U.S. Marshals Service, and briefing documents for a case that would be argued without her if she missed her flight. She had traveled this route more than 30 times. No one had ever stopped her. Officer Brett Connolly, 41, had been posted at George Bush Intercontinental Airport for 11 years. In that time, his personnel file had collected 19 formal complaints from travelers. 16 of those complaints came from Black or Latino passengers. The allegations were consistent across years and across complainants: racial profiling, unlawful detention, verbal abuse, excessive force applied to people who were not resisting. Not one complaint had produced a disciplinary hearing. Not one had resulted in suspension. His supervisor, Lieutenant Paul Greer, 49, had processed every dismissal with the same institutional efficiency. Insufficient evidence, no corroborating witnesses, conflicting accounts. Connolly had received a commendation in his 8th year. He had a preference for the pre-check and priority boarding lanes. He had told colleagues on more than one occasion that those lanes attracted a certain kind of traveler who needed to be reminded that access was earned. A black pediatric surgeon had been pulled from the pre-check line and detained for 2.5 hours in 2021. A black city councilwoman had been redirected to secondary screening on 3 separate trips and had filed 3 separate complaints. A black retired Army brigadier general, traveling in civilian clothes, had been told his military retiree identification was insufficient to verify his status. Every complaint dismissed. By the time Brett Connolly stepped into Carol Weston's path on that Tuesday morning, he had been doing this for 11 years without consequence. She was not a situation he was responding to. She was a selection he had already made. He radioed for backup and described her as non-compliant. She had not raised her voice. She had not moved without instruction. She had asked, clearly and calmly, for his badge number and his supervisor's name, both of which she was legally entitled to request. He grabbed her arm. Not a guiding pressure, a grip. His hand closed around her upper arm and yanked her sideways in a single motion. Her portfolio bag hit the floor and split open. Case documents, appellate briefs, a letter bearing the seal of the United States Marshal Service spread across the terminal tile in a wide fan. People nearby stopped. Phones came up. A woman with a child pulled her daughter close and stepped back. Connolly drove her forward into the metal screening table. Her forearm struck the edge. She cried out. Her reading glasses hit the floor, and the left lens shattered. He forced her arms behind her back, planted his knee into her upper back, and held her down against the table surface. She had not resisted, not once, not for a single second of the 14 minutes that had passed since he first stepped into her path. He leaned close and told her clearly, at full volume, with 5 security cameras capturing every syllable, that people like her always thought they were above the process. Through the pain, pressed against a metal surface in a public terminal, her voice did not waver. She told him she was a federal judge, that he was committing assault against a federal officer. He laughed at her. He reached for his handcuffs. 5 cameras were recording everything. None of them were malfunctioning. What Brett Connolly did not know what would define the next decade of his life was that his own body camera had been running since 7:36 that morning. The call reached Airport Police Chief Douglas Farr at 7:59. Then a second call. Then a third. He was 55 years old, 18 years with the department, the kind of administrator who had spent his career managing situations before they became problems. By the time he arrived at Terminal C 6 minutes after the handcuffs went on, he had already spoken to TSA Command, the Airport Authority Director, and a Houston city official who had watched a 30-second clip on her phone and called him before the clip had finished loading. He pulled Floor Supervisor Anita Webb aside at the checkpoint entrance and asked her one question. She answered it. The expression that crossed Farr's face was not concern. It was the specific look of a man calculating the distance between where he was standing and a disaster he could not outrun. He crossed to Connolly and told him quietly to remove the handcuffs. Connolly pushed back, non-compliant, he said. Witnesses would confirm. Farr cut him off with Judge Weston's full title, her court, and her Senate confirmation number. The handcuffs came off. When Judge Weston was helped to her feet, right arm cradled against her chest, blood running from a gash at her wrist where the cuff edge had caught the skin, Farr moved close and dropped his voice. He mentioned a private room. He mentioned medical attention arranged quietly. He began to describe a process by which the department could review the incident internally before any external reporting took place. Judge Weston looked at him with the patience of someone who had spent 19 years watching that sentence get people indicted. She told him she had built federal cases on exactly what he was attempting right now. She looked up at the camera mounted above the checkpoint. Then she looked back at him. She told him it would not work this time. A man had broken through the crowd while Connolly's knee was still on her back. Raymond Tibbs, 61, was a retired federal public defender, 31 years in Houston's federal court system. He had argued motions before Judge Weston on 4 separate occasions and recognized her before Connolly had finished pulling her toward the table. While the assault was still in progress, Tibbs identified himself, raised his phone, and placed a 911 call using the precise language of a man who had spent 3 decades in courtrooms, assault in progress, airport police officer, federal appellate judge, Terminal C pre-check, emergency medical services required. When Chief Farr turned to the witnesses clustered near the checkpoint and told them their recording devices would need to be surrendered as part of the department's official investigation, Tibbs informed him without raising his voice that warrantless confiscation of witness recordings was a federal offense. He suggested Farr reconsider. Farr did not collect the devices. Judge Weston refused the ambulance. She sat on a metal bench near the checkpoint, a paramedic wrapping her wrist, and made one call to the presiding chief judge of the Fifth Circuit. She told him she would not make the morning session. She told him why. The Houston FBI field office received formal notification at 8:19. 2 special agents arrived at Terminal C within 22 minutes. They cataloged every recording device, secured the scene, and placed a call to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division before 9 o'clock. By 9:45, the footage was running on national television. The FBI subpoenaed the airport's full security archive before noon. 5 cameras, synchronized footage. Every angle of every second of the 14 minutes documented with the kind of clarity that makes attorneys go quiet when they first review it. Connolly's incident report, filed at 11:22 that morning, stated that Judge Weston had been physically combative, had refused all lawful directions, and had presented a credible and escalating security concern. 5 cameras, from 5 separate positions, contradicted every single word. If this had happened before smartphones, before cloud backup, before 5 cameras were running in that terminal, do you think anyone would have believed her? Drop yes or no in the comments. And if this story is making you feel something, share it. Most people have never heard what happened next. Connolly had submitted a body camera malfunction report the same afternoon. His camera, he wrote, had experienced a technical failure at 7:46, 2 minutes before the confrontation with Judge Weston began. The report cited a specific error code. It was formatted correctly. It looked exactly like every other malfunction report in the department's system. FBI forensic technicians accessed the department's cloud backup server 46 hours after the assault. The camera had not malfunctioned. It had been recording without interruption from 7:36 in the morning. The footage showed Connolly at the pre-check entrance at 7:46, scanning the lane. He spotted Judge Weston approaching. He turned to the officer beside him, Officer Travis Webb, 29, and said, with a visible smirk on his face, that he had another one coming who thought she was entitled to be there. He told Webb to pay attention. He had not moved toward her because she triggered a protocol. He had seen her from across the terminal, identified her by sight, and repositioned himself to intercept her before she reached the entrance. The malfunction report, forensic analysts would later testify under oath, contained timestamps that had been manually altered after submission. He had filed a false federal document to destroy evidence of what he had done before he did it. Every dismissed complaint, every detained surgeon, every redirected councilwoman, every ignored allegation spanning 11 years was no longer a collection of unrelated incidents. It was a documented operational pattern, protected from the top, executed with the confidence of a man who had never once faced a consequence. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation into the Houston Airport Police Department 7 days after the assault. What they found was not confined to one officer or one lane. Internal department communications recovered during the investigation revealed a coordinated scheme. 6 officers, Connolly among them, had maintained a system they referenced in text messages as the count. The objective was straightforward: redirect as many minority travelers as possible from the pre-check and priority lanes during a single shift. The officer with the highest weekly total collected cash from the group at the end of each week. Lieutenant Paul Greer was not a passive enabler. He tracked the weekly numbers. He sent congratulatory messages when totals were high. In one recovered email, he noted that Connolly had put together an exceptional stretch and that no one else in the unit was close. He had been running the scoreboard. The 19 prior complaints against Connolly were pulled and re-examined. Investigators reached every complainant. 16 came forward publicly. A black emergency room physician detained for 3 hours. A black state appellate court judge redirected from pre-check 6 times across 4 years, who had filed 6 complaints, each dismissed within a week. A black retired FBI special agent who had been told his federal retiree credentials required additional verification. Over 11 years, 871 complaints had been filed against Houston Airport police officers. 91% involved minority travelers. Not one had produced a sustained finding. Not one officer had been disciplined. The pattern was not the result of individual discretion compounding over time. It was policy. The federal grand jury convened 4 weeks after the assault. The indictments were unsealed on a Wednesday morning, and they reached further than most people in the department had allowed themselves to expect. Brett Connolly faced assault under color of law under 18 United States Code, Section 242, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, filing false federal reports, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering for the manually altered malfunction report. The evidence tampering charge alone carried a potential sentence that his attorney described in a recorded phone call later recovered by investigators as catastrophic. Lieutenant Paul Greer was indicted as a co-conspirator, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, obstruction of justice, failure to prevent a federal civil rights violation. He had not simply processed dismissals. He had organized, supervised, and financially administered the scheme that produced them. Chief Douglas Farr was charged separately with obstruction of justice and attempted witness intimidation. His conduct at the scene, the private room offer, the device confiscation attempt, the instruction to Anita Webb not to make statements to federal agents until she had spoken with department counsel had been recorded by 2 cameras from different angles. It was not ambiguous. Officer Travis Webb accepted immunity in exchange for full cooperation. He sat before investigators and described the count system, the weekly payouts, the understood protection running through the command structure, and the shared departmental knowledge that complaints from minority travelers would not survive the week they were filed. The trial of Brett Connolly ran for 3 weeks in federal court. Every seat was filled every day. Civil rights attorneys, legal scholars, journalists, and 16 of the prior victims who had come forward during the investigation, including the retired FBI agent and the state appellate judge, sat in the gallery the morning the prosecution delivered its closing argument. Connolly's defense argued training compliance and reasonable threat assessment. His attorney described the body camera footage as contextually ambiguous and the count system messages as informal workplace communication stripped of meaning by prosecutorial framing. The prosecution played the body camera footage, the terminal entrance, Connolly scanning the lane, the moment he identifies Judge Weston from a distance, the turn to Webb, the smirk, the words. The courtroom did not make a sound. Connolly took the stand. He said he had no clear memory of that exchange. He said the footage had been selectively presented. He said the 19 complaints against him reflected a pattern of coordinated false reporting by travelers who objected to lawful security procedures. The prosecution laid the evidence on the table in sequence. The count text messages, the weekly cash transfer records, the emails from Greer, the forensic testimony establishing that the malfunction report timestamps had been altered manually after the fact on the afternoon of the assault. He had not reacted badly to a difficult situation. He had selected his target, carried out the assault, and then spent the remainder of that Tuesday building a paper record designed to make it disappear. 7 hours of jury deliberation. Unanimous verdict. Guilty on every count. Connolly received 9 years in federal prison and a lifetime ban from law enforcement service in any capacity, in any jurisdiction in the United States. Greer received 5 years. Farr received 3 years and surrendered his pension in full. The 4 remaining officers from the count scheme received sentences between 18 months and 3 years. 4 months after sentencing, Judge Carol Weston filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. The defendants, Brett Connolly, Paul Greer, Douglas Farr, the City of Houston, and the Houston Airport Authority. The complaint alleged systemic discrimination, deliberate indifference, failure to train, failure to supervise, and a sustained institutional pattern of civil rights violations against minority travelers spanning more than a decade. The city moved to settle within 3 weeks of the filing. Their offer was $7 million, structured for speed, with a confidentiality provision attached. Judge Weston declined. Her response was not a counteroffer. It was a set of conditions. A full public admission of wrongdoing, not a statement of regret, a formal admission. Complete dissolution and reconstruction of the airport police force, an independent civilian oversight board with investigative authority, subpoena power, and no departmental review filter. Mandatory bias training for every officer hired in the reconstruction. A federal consent decree placing the department under Department of Justice monitoring for 10 years. The city rejected her terms. The civil trial ran 3 weeks. Expert witnesses presented statistical analysis of the 871 complaints filed over 11 years, 91% involving minority travelers, 0 sustained findings. One expert testified that producing that outcome without active institutional suppression was, within any standard probabilistic framework, not possible. The jury was out for 2 days. $23,600,000. $14,100,000 in compensatory damages, $9,500,000 in punitive damages against the individual officers and their supervisors. The largest civil rights verdict rendered against an airport police department in the history of the United States. The city filed notice of appeal within 30 days. The appeal was never pursued. The full settlement was paid within 60 days of the verdict. The Houston Airport Police Department was dissolved by order of the City Council. The reconstruction that followed brought new leadership, revised hiring criteria, mandatory body camera protocols with tamper-proof cloud archiving, and a zero-tolerance policy requiring external review of every complaint involving use of force or discriminatory conduct. The Civilian Oversight Board was seated with independent investigative authority, no departmental veto, no internal filter, subpoena power intact. A federal consent decree formalized 10 years of Department of Justice monitoring. 16 additional victims filed civil suits. Their combined settlements totaled $12,400,000. 2 years into his sentence at a federal correctional facility in Beaumont, Texas, the city where Carol Weston was born, Brett Connolly gave a recorded interview to a regional journalist. He said he had performed his duties in accordance with his training. He said she had escalated the encounter. He said the outcome would have been different if she had simply complied from the beginning. Judge Weston responded when asked. She said she had complied. Every instruction, from the first moment to the last. Hands visible, voice control. No resistance at any point while being assaulted in a public terminal in front of dozens of witnesses and 5 cameras. She said the compliance argument had never been about her behavior. It had always been about his assumption that a black woman standing in that lane required a justification that no one behind her was asked to provide. She did not need to justify her presence. The cameras documented it for her. 8 months after the assault, Judge Carol Weston walked through Terminal C at George Bush Intercontinental Airport for the first time since that Tuesday. Her wrist had healed. A thin scar along the inside edge was the only physical record remaining. She carried the same portfolio bag, the same navy blazer. Her credentials were in her hand not because the new agents would ask, but because she had made a decision, somewhere in the months that followed, that she would move through this country with her identification visible, not as a concession, as a statement. The new TSA officers nodded as she passed. A young black woman in a new uniform, part of the first class hired under the reconstructed department, stepped forward and stopped her. She did not say much. 2 words. Judge Weston looked at her for a moment. She nodded once. She walked through the pre-check lane and did not stop.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.
Equity is an ongoing path, and information is your greatest armor. We appreciate your viewership and dedication to undeniable truth.